These are shade balls. They're being dumped into this water reservoir in Los Angeles. And contrary to what you may have heard, their main purpose is not to reduce evaporation. So what are they really for? To find out, I'm visiting the largest collection of these balls anywhere on Earth at LA Reservoir. $96 million shade balls. That's correct. 96 million. It's very rare for you to see 96 million of anything.
This is your life vest, which you are required to wear.
All right.
Throw a leg over and climb on in any way you can. There you go.
Looking at this, I had so many questions. Like, why are they black? Are they safe to have in drinking water? How much do they cost? Do they actually reduce evaporation? And what is their real purpose? Is it hard to drive in shade balls?
It is very hard.
Why is that?
These are actually partially filled with water. And the reason they're filled with water is that at LA Reservoir we have some really high winds. And so, if we didn't put water in these things, there'd be balls bouncing on the 5 freeways people drive down. They'd be all over the place. So these keep the balls in the reservoir, and if they do start to roll, they kind of wobble because the water makes them uneven.
But that makes them significantly more difficult to push out of the way, especially when they form close-packed crystal-like structures. Behind the boat, the balls quickly come together in our wake. Some close to the motor are pulled along with the boat. Wow. What did you think the first time they suggested doing this, or when it first came in?
Yeah, it was a little out there.
Did you think they were nuts?
No, not nuts.
Well, it looks absurd. It's like we're in the world's biggest ball pit.
Right, yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah, you can't tell by standing here that we're actually floating over, I think it's probably 40 feet right here, 40, 50 feet deep below us. And you can't even see any water. You'd think it was a joke, right? Like, if you didn't know, you'd be like, no, you're not. That's
you're
a green screen or something, right? Yeah, it's fake.
So, like, when I switch on my tap at home, is the water coming from here?
Yes.
Sometimes. Or always. Most of the time. Most of the time the water's coming from here. Absolutely nuts. So why is LA Reservoir covered in shade balls? Well, the problem all started with bromide.
Bromide is a naturally occurring substance. It's associated with salt water, and so normally places like the California Aqueduct that comes down from the Delta, you get some saltwater intrusions. You have some bromide in the water. Bromide's harmless, and it's almost impossible to remove. But when you disinfect the water with ozone, that bromide becomes bromate, and bromate's carcinogenic. And so around the year 2000, they wrote regulations regulating bromate, and the regulations basically said if you have a treatment plant that uses ozone, then you have to watch your bromate formation and be careful not to form too much. So the only place we ever measured bromate was at our filter plant.
And the results were always within the 10 micrograms per liter limit set by regulators. So they were confused when they got a call from one of their customers, a beverage company in LA.
They said, we have some really high levels of bromate showing up. Are you aware of this? And we said, well, we don't show anything.
But between the filtration plant and the customer was the reservoir. So they did some tests.
Almost immediately upon coming into this open reservoir, the bromate levels jumped. It turned out that bromide with chlorine, which was supposed to be safe, in bright sunlight, formed bromate even more than ozone did. And so we made this unfortunate scientific discovery that actually was not part of any regulatory scheme. And so here we are at the reservoir. We have a water source that's got bromide in it, harmless. We have chlorine we have to have to disinfect the water. And we have sunlight because it's open. The only choice we have is to remove sunlight. So we looked at all sorts of things. We looked at floating tarps across the water. And normally you put a floating cover on the water, but that's a multi-year project. And so we said, well, can we manufacture these kind of trampolines with like PVC pipe? And we said, well, they're just going to become bird perches and we'll have a big water quality problem. And so then we knew we had high-density polyethylene pipe, which is used in the water industry, and we know that it floats. We at one point thought about, can we just float a pile of pipe across the surface? Well, that's hard to do and very expensive because it's a lot of material. So maybe we could take some pipe and run it through a chipper, and we can make a debris field across the surface, like the back corner of a lake somewhere. But then you have all this mushy, warm water with plastic floating on the top. That sounds like a petri dish. And so, lo and behold, Dr. Brian White did some research, and he found the shade ball.
Except they weren't called shade balls at the time.
This product existed, and they were called bird balls. And they used it on ponds that had mine tailings where they didn't want waterfowl to go in and get poisoned, and also around airports where there were ponds and they wanted to keep the waterfowl off so that they didn't take off and get into jet engines. You know, they'd actually